Sup YouTube, Sikey here, and welcome to the first tier list video on this channel. This tier list is going to be going over all hunters currently in the game in the NAEU rank mode season 18 server, going over what are the best hunters, what are they good for, how good are they throughout the game, and are there any big drawbacks to each hunter that is making them in a lower tier or a higher tier. Now, for those who are about to skip to the end, hold up a second. Right before you start writing your arguments and you skip to the end and you look at that there's a hunter in a tier that you don't like, make sure that you go to the part of the video that I explain why I ranked the hunter the way I did. So that way, when you're writing your argument in the comments, we can have a more constructive debate and maybe we can change the minds of some other people, or maybe my mind can be changed and maybe I ranked a hunter a little bit incorrectly or a little bit wrong, but either way, this is without further ado, let's go over the tiers. Real quick, before we start ranking these hunters, it's important to know why we're ranking them the way we are. So the first tier is S tier. So these are for hunters that are most likely to win and they have nearly no flaws. So if we're talking in terms of categories, let's go over categories. We're going to be going over early game strategy, camping, late game abilities or strategy, and the comeback potential that each hunter has. So maybe a hunter isn't that as good early game, but they become a lot stronger late game, and that can be what wins them or ties them the game in the long run. A tier is for the hunters that can potentially win games, but they have a small flaw that holds them back. This can be just a little bit small in either of the categories. B tier is for hunters that can win, but they have a major flaw, and it's holding them back from a win, but they can still relatively tie if the chances are in their favor. C tier is for hunters that struggle to win or even tie due to major flaws or a flaw. So this could be just one huge flaw that's really weighing a hunter down. It's just if they fix this one thing, this hunter would go up a tier or two. But due to that one huge flaw, that hunter is unable to be better than C tier just because of that, and they can hardly even manage to win games. D tier is for hunters that have several flaws in most categories. So this could be something like they have a hard time chasing people, they have a hard time camping, they have a hard time in the late game. There's just something about their ability. There are core mechanics that are preventing them from really ramping up in terms of maybe chase potential or maybe comeback potential, something along those lines. And in F tier, you old man. That's where all the old men hunters go that have no purpose being in this game and just need a huge rework or something to fix them, because the way they are right now is just unplayable, so to speak. With that being said, let's go straight into the tier list. And the first one we have on this list is Hellenberg. We're going to be going in sequential order according to the book by default ranking. Technically, Feaster came before Wu Ching, Photographer, and Mad Eyes, but that's just the way the book rates it, and we're going to go in order of that. So the first one is Hellenberg. Hellenberg, quite an interesting hunter. Everyone is afraid of this guy in terms of camping, but no one wants to talk about his chase ability, and that is because his chase ability early game is very weak. His chase ability consists of two things: using his Fire Spirit to block off exit routes or possible kiting routes for the survivor in terms of looping at least, and using hunt. Everyone knows that Hellenberg can't exist without his hunt, and together with hunt, they combine with his Fire Spirit to be a pretty deadly force. But the problem is it's not that deadly because a lot of survivor abilities do super well against Hellenberg, whether that be Perfumer, Gravekeeper, Mercenary, Forward. A lot of survivor abilities are just capable enough to just transition away or prevent a hit entirely, maybe just straight up walking in a straight line and then using your perfume so that the Hellenberg can't swing at you. Perfectly fine strategy as well, and there's just a lot of ways to counter his chase. What people are really scared about Hellenberg is his camp. His camping is very difficult to deal with, but if you have a Mercenary on your team, it's also a lot harder for the Hellenberg to knock them down. That's why Hellenbergs will typically ban Mercenary. Even then, though, his late game strategy doesn't get much better than that, because all he gets is a puppet and a second puppet. And all the puppet's really good for is they control areas, but later on we'll get to Dream Witch, and the puppets are supposed to control areas, and it's meant for people who don't really have a good time at controlling a certain area, such as Dream Witch. Maybe you have a hard time multitasking, but either way, the puppet doesn't do a good job because the puppet doesn't really stop the decode. In fact, hunters can switch with it, but at the end of the day, the survivor can also just ignore it if you don't fire it up or use your fire ability. The fire ability, in terms of the puppet, by the way, is okay. You really can only use it if the puppet's not in a good position. Otherwise, if it's in a good position, you can't really use that fire ability with the puppet. On top of that, the puppet is very easy to counter. you can just click on the wrench icon right before the puppet swings at you, and it's very, very easy to counter. A little bit more on this trick, but Hellenberg does have a few tricks. This could come in helpful at any part of the game, but it's mostly late game, and by then it's a little bit too late. But he does have this Hellenberg trick with the red puppet where he could switch and swing at the same time, and it could be pretty devastating if used correctly. But it's really hard to pull off because any veteran survivor will know how to deal with it, and it's going to be really hard to pull off, especially if they're going to just keep transitioning away, and it's going to be really hard to line up between you and your red puppet and having that happen. In terms of ranking, this is going to be a little bit in terms of between the lines. You could make an argument for D and C because he does have major flaws in a lot of categories, but the thing is, he really, really does a deadly job at the camping part of the map. If you don't have a mercenary, this guy can be a real threat, and he could potentially tie games just because of his camping ability. So I'm going to give him C tier. You guys can make an argument that D tier, definitely not B or higher, but also not unusable. Pretty just weak hunter overall. We'll just say a weak hunter because his chase he really struggles with, and any survivor in this game should be able to kite him 100 seconds around. So, and it's just a big struggle for Hellenberg trying to chase them down, even with Blink. Next up, we have Clown, smiley face Joker. This guy used to be S tier all the way back in Season 1, one of the best hunters in the game, but now things have changed. Now, Hellenberg is, in fact, a little bit better than Clown, because Clown actually gets countered by way more survivors than Hellenberg does. I mean, seriously. They've added Perfumer, Magician is a great counter, Enchantress, Prospector, Little Girl, Gravekeeper. There are so many great survivor counters to go against Clown. So right away, his chase potential early game is really, really bad. It consists of putting on an infinite rocket, putting on wind wings, and maybe putting on a modified drill if there's a forward or a mercenary on the team, so that if you find them, you can hit them and it takes forever to heal them up, since that is the strategy for survivors who are rescuers to get healed up right away if they get hit early game. But it's a very weak strategy, because even if you're not a survivor that just hard counters Clown like there are tons of, then you can just be next to any good pallet in this game, any good cipher, drop the pallet, and it's going to be way, way difficult for the Clown to ever reach you. You may even have to waste his dash or try to do a risky blink through the pallet or through the wall just to hit you. So already off to a bad start early game. In terms of camping, he does a decent job with, but the problem is that I've gone over this in my rescue guide. All you have to do against Clown, even if you're not playing Coordinator, you can counter his wind wings by simply taking the hit, rescuing, and elbow padding away in time, and it is technically possible to do all of that without taking a second hit, even though this guy is supposed to have one of the fastest recoveries in this game with wind wings. In terms of maybe getting a lucky Terror Shock, I won't lie, he can get a lucky Terror Shock every once in a while with the dash, but it's really all up to luck. That's really nothing that he can do, and the late game just gets worse and worse. His dash gets stronger, but the problem is that it can still get countered. It is still the same thing, just a little bit faster, and it still gets hard countered by a lot of survivors. He isn't that bad in terms of the late game comeback potential. He could get a hit and he could knock someone down, but the problem with Clown is that most people are already at full health, and if you try to hit them with a dash, it's not going to do anything because they were at full health. So that's usually what happens. I'm not going to say that Clown is unusable per se, because there are certain maps where he can work on, like Moonlit, where most ciphers aren't near very good pals, so you can usually get the dash hit, and that's what the Clown needs. He needs that infinite dash hit, and that's what gets him maybe a tie, maybe a win. But otherwise, Clown is extremely used to use. I'm going to give him D just because he has too many flaws to deal with. Next up, we have Gamekeeper. Now, Gamekeeper is an interesting one. He used to be F tier a long, long time ago. For a long time, he used to be F tier. He's actually not as bad anymore, but still struggles to see any light in the meta. And so basically his early game strategy centers around hooking survivors and getting a hit on them. The problem with that strategy is that it relies heavily on the survivors being in open areas and on them transitioning. So if you have some survivor constantly dropping pals before you can hook them to you, then you're in a lot of trouble, especially if they're cutting around walls. You can't hook over those walls unless it's Moonlit, which I will give him that. If it's Moonlit, he can hook over a lot of those walls and he gets a lot of value. But otherwise, Gamekeeper is really, really struggling early game. Though not that much, but I can't give him that high a rating just because, even something like Geisha has a much easier time, especially since she can go through walls. At least Geisha can go through walls. His hook is always going to be limited to those walls unless it's like Moonlit or a low terrain object. He's always going to be struggling. Let's talk about his traps as well real quick. The traps cannot be placed next to chairs, and they're really, really bad on chase, because if you try to do them mid-chase, the survivor can hear that. They'll know you're placing a trap down or want to place a trap down. That's why you're going in a weird route to place it in like a window or pallet that the gamekeeper wants you to use. And by then the survivor just transitions away. So it's really, really weak. The traps, you have to place them ahead of time. They require too much maintenance, honestly, because half the time they might disappear to like you placing someone on the rocket chair, and it's a really, really big deal. Now, in terms of camping, like I said, he doesn't have much. He just kind of hopes that he gets a terror shock with the hook, maybe gets a terror shock with his basic hit, maybe you don't rescue for the next 14 seconds and he gets another hook hit. There's really not a lot to say about camping. And in terms of late game potential, not much changes. He's really hoping that by that point someone is stepping into his trap. He gets a little bit of pushback from that hook, being able to stun survivors in place and keep them slower, but it really doesn't help that much. You rather just hook the survivor straight up. So Gamekeeper in general, not a super great hunter. He really relies on his hook early game on the survivors not being near walled areas. It's about the same level as Hellenberg. It can be really good sometimes, but the presence doesn't make that much of an impact as the game progresses. And neither does his comeback potential. Hooking across the map, that's nice for map control. And that's another thing, map control. Gamekeeper, Hellenberg, and Clown. Clown and Hellenberg have a little bit more map control. Gamekeeper has a lot less. But either way, it really doesn't matter if you have a lot of map control if you just struggle to catch survivors in the first place. And we're going to go over that with Wu-Ching and Nightmare. Hunters like Wu-Ching and Nightmare, those hunters can have a ton of map pressure with their abilities, but their chase is subpar to say the least and can really struggle to chase survivors. Wu-Ching a little bit more, but Nightmare, he's a nightmare to deal with when you're playing. But yeah, Gamekeeper has a major flaw. And he can struggle to tie sometimes just because of that major flaw, especially survivor abilities have just become too strong for him. But next up is Ripper. Ripper is a hot take for me. Hot take, and by that I mean he used to be S tier and he is my favorite hunter to use. Here's the problem with Ripper recently. There's been a lot of good hunters that are just a little bit better at Ripper. On top of that, if that is not enough to convince people to stop playing Ripper, there's also more and more survivors who are just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's just Priestess, Mercenary, Forward. These types of survivors are really, really annoying to deal with, especially when you're playing as Ripper. So what ends up happening is if you find a Forward or Mercenary, what ends up happening is you just use their abilities or run away. Ripper actually has a very strong ability. Because of a few reasons. First of all, it's a full swing. It's a full half damage hit, same as a basic hit. So it's really, really strong in that regard. On top of that, it can go through pallets, can go through walls, can go above pallets, it can go above windows. There's not a lot of reach with it, but the thing about that Foggy Blade that makes it so great is that even if you get stunned, the Foggy Blade still comes out. So if you are not playing the right survivor against Foggy Blade Master right here, what's going to end up happening is you're going to take a Foggy Blade hit, and against a good Ripper that isn't missing any of his Foggy Blades, Ripper is going to be really, really dominant in that situation. So here's the thing with Ripper. If they find someone who is not very well built to counter Ripper's traits, then they are going to die very, very quickly. A good Ripper is going to prevent that survivor from getting a very long kite, because what's going to happen is Ripper is going to Foggy Blade them once. He's going to wait on his Foggy Blade to come back. But besides that, he can't really do much without his invisibility. And then when that Foggy Blade comes back, he gets another hit in. If it's something like a prisoner that he found, or maybe like a prospector or an enchantress, they can't really do much. They're just waiting on their death at that point. And, they're just praying that the Ripper misses the Foggy Blade at that point. It's very, very similar to Blood Queen in that regard, that survivors are just at the mercy of her mirror. And then after the mirror happens, not a lot can be, for the hunter can be done at that point. Though not as big of a deal, Ripper is invisible, and you can do some pretty sweet mind tricks with Ripper and make it seem like you're on the opposite side of a wall when really you're on the same side of a wall. That really depends. It's not as useful in certain situations, but mostly you're doing it for the invisibility, and the invisibility speed combined with the Foggy Blade makes it so that it's very hard to deal with Rippers. Now, what makes Ripper less good, per se, it's boosts. Boosts and abilities that transition, or abilities that can soak up multiple flag hits. So like Perfume, Shovels, Mercenary Elbow Pads, Footballs, even Priestess Pores are super annoying because it puts the Ripper in place and gives the survivor more time to get away from you. And Ripper, you need to be in close proximity to hit those survivors. If you're not in close proximity, then you can't use your Foggy Blade reliably. If you try to, a good survivor will see that you're throwing it from far, they're going to dodge it, and they're going to just absolutely shred you afterwards because you do not have anything for the next 20 seconds. That's why a good Ripper is hard to deal with, because a good Ripper will hold on to their Foggy Blade until they can get actual hidden. Problem with this is they have to hold on to it for who knows how long, indefinitely, until they can actually get in range of you. So it really depends on the survivor you're facing, and it really depends on the area you start with. The biggest thing with Ripper is you need to make sure you start in a good area to chase. And that's the nice thing about Ripper. But after that, you're at the mercy of whatever ciphers are being decoded next. You have to go after the ciphers. And on top of not having a lot of cipher pressure, you're also at the mercy of just wherever the next cipher is. And if that next cipher is in an area that just works really well against Ripper, a lot of forced pallet breaks, and that's really bad for Ripper. And he's going to have a tough time catching to that survivor. Now, in terms of camping, he does a pretty nice job at camping. Now, there's a lot of outplay potential with Ripper. You can get a Foggy Blade hit, and although it's not super consistent, you can do it, and it can save you games. Even if you don't stop the rescue, just getting 2 hits in can be a big deal. It's probably going to be the tie difference in such a game. So Ripper, very strong early game chase, but as the game progresses, he gets weaker and weaker because more and more ciphers are being done. He can't possibly control all those ciphers. Ripper can definitely be really hard to rank just because he's either between A and B tier. Sometimes he feels like A tier, sometimes he feels like B tier. More of the time he feels like A tier though, because that Foggy Blade is what carries him. And it's just what brings him to victory a lot of time. And since this is rank mode, this isn't like tournament gameplay where you're facing the world's best survivors all playing the same thing. You're probably going to end up with a lot of, stuff like painters, prisoners, survivors that don't have good early game abilities for you to deal with. On top of that, as Ripper, you can choose where you want to start your early game chase and make sure it's in an area that favors you as the Ripper. Make sure you're carrying teleport with this guy. And honestly, if you play him perfectly, I think you can get in some solid wins with this guy. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I see a Ripper in rank, just because he is a pretty decent hunter, but sometimes he can be a little bit below average as well. I'll give him a benefit of the doubt just because I play him as well.
Sup guys, Editor Sikey here from the future. Just want to let you guys know that eventually I do move Ripper down to B tier because I realized that his flaws actually make him more of a B tier hunter than his good characteristics make him an A tier hunter. The reason for this is even if he does get a good quick kill early game, I realize that there's nothing stopping the survivors from just sitting on the ciphers and decoding it while you get a good kill. Like, even if you find that prisoner or you find that painter who you just killed really quickly because they had no good ability against your Foggy Blade, I find that oftentimes good survivors will just not rescue because they know how powerful Ripper can be on camping. So they just end up doing the ciphers. And then even if you have teleport, by then it's too late. There's no way you can stop the last 2 ciphers from being done. And at that point, best you can do is a tie. So B tier, like I said earlier, these types of hunters at B tier can tie, usually, and pretty well at that, pretty consistently. But in terms of winning, they just struggle, and Ripper definitely fits that bill. The reason I was tending more towards A tier at the time is because I was thinking about, well, possibly Ripper can get a quick kill after the teleport because his invisibility speed bonus is just so synergetic with that teleport. He can just immediately start moving and cut survivors off. Anytime Ripper is going around a pallet or window, he's just so much more efficient at it because he has that huge speed bonus. And at that point, maybe you can get the survivors in the same situations as they were earlier where they had a quick kill and they didn't want to rescue, and then you do it again, and then at that point, Ripper can potentially win the game, and they have to go rescue at that point. In that situation, you'd be more in a winning position, but it's no guarantee. I mean, who's to say you're going to teleport on the mercenary forward and not on the kiter that you wanted? So something to think about. Yes, you can use context clues to figure out where the other kiter survivor is by figuring out where maybe the mercenary forward is, depending if you saw them earlier on in the match, but it's not a guarantee. This is all assuming that you were even able to find the right target quickly on in the game and you were able to quickly knock them down and put them on a rocket chair, which is not a guarantee either. For those reasons, I'm going to have to give Ripper B tier.
But anyway, Spider. Spider is an interesting hunter. Spider, just like Ripper, used to be S tier. Difference with Ripper and Spider is that Spider got a ton of nerfs. Ripper never really got any nerfs. And Ripper really depends on the team comp. Spider, the thing about Spider is that she doesn't have a good way of hitting through walls like Ripper does. She doesn't have as much flexibility with her webs. The thing about Soul Weaver is that, yeah, she gets more power with the presence, and she gets a little bit faster shoot time with Spider Ball, but otherwise her strategy really doesn't change as the game progresses. I mean, with Ripper, your strategy slowly does change because then you're able to combo it with a Fog Blade and you're able to get a lot more success. But with Spider, it can be a lot more difficult chaining those webs, especially if the survivor just drops a pallet in your way and then you have to break it. You can't go around it. For example, like stuff like Graveyard or Arms Factory, those are the types of pallets where you can't go around, and just Spider just struggles. Even if she's right next to the pallet, it's not like Ripper where Ripper can hit over the pallet and have some sort of something that she can do. She's sort of at the mercy of just whether there's good pallets in the way. At least Ripper can deal with the good pallets and shoot over them. But with Spider, it really depends. Her late game is a lot weaker. She does have a major flaw in that late game, but she's also not a horrible hunter. She is in fact getting a buff. She's getting a buff to her threshold when she starts early game, and that's another big deal. She has to wait a while for those threads to come back, and she doesn't start exactly with a whole lot. She can maybe chain 3 at most, but after that she's going to need like a blink hit, or maybe wait a little bit more for those threads to come web back onto something. If I were to just also not rank that bad Ripper or Soul Weaver, which can be really solid in the right area, similar to Ripper, just because early game can be really deal with in the right area. But something like she falls to the similar fate as Ripper, where and so Soul Weaver can be not an awful hunter. A lot of people I feel like are sleeping on these two hunters. Ripper, in fact, Spider, worse. They're not awful than with Ripper. I rather Spider. You don't really have a consistent speed bonus that speeds you from cipher to cipher, from chair to cipher, from cipher to chair. You don't really have that power with Spider, because if you use too much web, well, you're bone dry. You don't have anything for the next chase, and you really have to save onto your webs. The fact that you have to hold onto your webs until after the chair rescue makes it really, really difficult for Spiders. On top of that, her camping is a lot weaker than Ripper's. And it can just be a little bit of a nuisance dealing with situations. Next up, we have Geisha. Geisha is a really interesting hunter because Geisha has been changed and she got reworked, and a lot of people didn't like that rework. The thing about Geisha is that ever since her rework, I would say she's actually become better. Now, I know at first a lot of people made it was hard to get used to the Geisha's rework, but over time, I think people can admit that having that ability to just dash whenever she wants, wherever she wants, is just a lot better than being forced to dash to survivors. Now, the biggest thing about Geisha is that if you actually have your butterfly on the ground and not have it on the survivor attached, you can actually dash to the survivor, and the survivor can't do anything about it. They could try to do a lucky vault, but I guess that's pretty risky, so they're probably not going to do that. The biggest problem with Geisha, like, I'm not saying that Geisha is a horrible hunter, very buggy, but she's an extremely buggy definitely, character. Sometimes she'll dash through, other times she won't. The way it really depends if a survivor picked up your butterfly. If a survivor picked up your butterfly, it's going to be really, especially against a survivor that knows where you're going to sometimes get through the power, where she can dash over walls. Really, really buggy. On top of that, it's just going to be really difficult. I'm trying to use my butterfly, and I can't because there's stuff in the way, and if I try using the dash, it's going to stop the dash, and that can be really, really annoying that you're almost limited in that regard. In terms of her camping, she doesn't have a lot as well. Not a lot going for her. Even like Spider has a little bit more than Geisha. But as she progresses, her late game abilities become stronger, like really strong. Like her full presence dash, do not mess with the full presence dash. It can be really, really strong. So if Geisha were to start with a dash like that at that insane speed, I would be no doubt putting her in A tier. That would make her insanely good. But the biggest problem with Geisha is that a lot of survivors, even if like a lot of survivors have good abilities to counter Geisha, even if it's something like a prisoner shock, it can make a big deal in the long run, especially like Prospector 2. Prospector can be really annoying for Geisha just because he stuns her in place, and then she could still dash, I guess, but by then he's transitioned away to a window or a pallet. And by then you may as well hold on to it. Similar to Ripper, that she kind of has to hold on to it until she really gets value from it up close. Because once the survivor is far away, that dash, if it's not full presence, is a lot harder to get good value out of because it's so darn slow. So late game, she gets a really, really fast teleport. Many people don't know this, but Geisha actually has the fastest teleport in this game and is unlike any other hunters in this game. It is so fast, it is double the speed, and it's ridiculous. And in that regard, she can get a knockdown late game. But besides that, what usually ends up happening with Geishas is Geishas just usually end up tying the game. Even if they had a good start, it's just really, really difficult to hold onto that pressure as the game progresses. Now, I wish Geisha was a little bit better. Geisha used to be A tier, but now there's just so many survivors that do a good job. Mm. Wu Chang. Wu Chang is an interesting one as well. Wu Chang.
If you have
Wu Chang, great game sense with Wu Chang, you can really
starts
really
with an umbrella and his main
strategy.
all for one,
game,
definitely a
popular
Wu
Chang
survivor.
So
would
love
of
to
all,
use this guy. And if you have a Seer on your team, that is a huge deal. Because now it's going to be tremendously
it's
harder
really easy for the
to
survivors
get
to
anything back to each other. He's switching targets. He's switching mostly about surprise. Getting that
you're really just at the
survivors
mercy
later on
that they don't
maybe
start
you're
a
hearing
second cipher.
because once you start a second cipher, you as Wu Chang are in a lot of trouble. The problem with Wu Chang is that ever since they added better communication for survivors, like Hunter change target, it can be really, really difficult to get those hits in, especially as a Hunter that has no way of doing other ways of damage. And that's something else I forgot to mention. I can't really give Wu Chang a very high real way of doing just damage, because he literally has nothing in the way of, which is early kind of a big should be able when it comes to popping kite at least a tiable kite. It means she's always forced to take a basic hit, and there's nothing she can do about it. That's not easy. Don't get me wrong, especially if you're playing something like Mechanic, you really, really praise on those mechanics. But otherwise, in that regard, at least you can pressure the survivors a ton. So she's like the needless to say here, but his chase really, really easily. There, I say, really depends on the really depends on where. And if he doesn't get it, he is in a lot of trouble. So that's what he really depends on. At that point, if the survivor knows what they're doing, it's going to be really, really hard to get a second hit in. At that point, you're praying for the survivor to mess up. On top of that, you're praying for the survivor to not be something like a mercenary or gravekeeper or perfumer, priestess, anything like that, anything super strong. But the thing is, even something like Prisoner can counter Wu Chang, and all they have to do is get off the cipher when someone pings Hunter change target. Now, in terms of his comeback potential, that is a different story. Now, Wu Chang usually starts off in a bad position, but as the game progresses, once they pop those gates, the chances of him being able to knock someone down with a bell or maybe a soul siphon and then teleport across the map, maybe using umbrella, maybe using a teleport tray, are very, very high, and the survivors can end up usually tying the game. So he's a little bit risky. I wouldn't recommend it, but he can definitely tie games if you can pull it off. At least Wu Chang, if you're running umbrella teleport, that's not as bad. But at the end of the day, Wu Chang usually ends up tying games, and it's really, really rough to get anywhere else other than that. Maybe you'll get an early game down. Maybe you'll be able to get out of control that way. But Next up, we have Photographer. Now, Photographer used to be S tier back in the day, but nowadays his early game strategy is very luck dependent. So what you do as photographers, everyone knows you take a picture and you try to find someone in the camera world. Then you find them in the camera world, assuming you find someone you like maybe a mercenary. If you can find a mercenary and hit him, or maybe even knock him down, not preferable, but if you can manage to hit other people and then on top of that cheer someone else, that would be the best early game strategy. But the problem with Photographer is, sure, if you maybe know spawns, but even if you know spawns, what could end up happening is you may never even find the survivors that you knocked down or damaged. So you're really relying on being able to find the survivors you knocked out and hoping that they show up later in the game. It's like a really, really bad way of investing. You're investing your damage right now, your time and damage into survivors right now that you may never even find later on. On top of that, he gets hard countered by Doctor. He gets soft countered by Barmaid and Psychologist. For example, if there's a mercenary who you hit as Photographer and they're like 44% HP, meaning that you cannot heal them, but it also means that you as a Photographer can one-shot them. Well, then all the Psychologist has to do, or all the Barmaid has to do, is give them a drink, send some healing to them, and boom, just like that, they're at full health. Even though Barmaid's not that popular, Psychologist is a lot more popular. That's really, really, really pushing Photographer down quite a bit. Now, Photographer can be really difficult to pull a comeback potential with. Once you get the gates activated against Photographer, there's almost nothing he can do. It's really, really difficult trying to keep him on track onto a tie or a win. It's not like with Wu Ching, where at least Wu Ching can make a comeback and switch positions rapidly left and right. Photographer has literally no chase, completely relies on luck on the camera. Hopefully he finds the people he wanted, and hopefully he finds enough of them over enough periods of time, and hopefully he's even able to chair someone at all. What ends up happening is in some Photographer games for me is no one even gets chaired, and we may end up popping 2 or 3 ciphers, and by then the Photographer's like, okay, that's a good game, because now he has to camp the chair and there's not a lot he can do. I have not played Photographer in a long, long time. Now, there are so many problems with him. He has really bad early game. Not the worst, but it's not that great. His camping is really, really bad. It depends on luck that he ever hit the rescuer. His late game ability, the card trick, is not that much better. It really doesn't do a whole lot for him. And on top of that, his control, late game, deciphers, it's okay. But once again, it really depends on the survivors being dominant. You standing next to the camera, standing in open areas where you can find them if they get knocked down from your camera world. It really, against veteran survivors, this is not going to work. You're going to be in a lot of troubles against Photographer. So, sorry, Photographer. You're kind of up there with Clown. Now, I would say that Clown is a little bit worse, than Photographer. Photographer's a little bit better than Clown, but dude, you're better off playing Hellumber and Gamekeeper than freaking Photographer. He just relies on luck. So at least Gamekeeper can take down someone with skills and placing those bear traps ahead of time, being clever. Hellumber can at least really, really beat down on the survivors that try to rescue against him. A Photographer, he's got none of that. He's got no early game, no late game, no camping. It's really, really rough with Photographer. He's not garbage tier necessarily, like ye old man tier, but he's definitely old and he's definitely a man. But he's definitely not very good in this game either. Definitely would need a rework. Would be nice to see a rework with Photographer. Maybe make him less luck dependent and more skill oriented. That would be nice. Give him some more outplay potential. There is outplay potential with Photographer, but it's so easy to predict that it's actually laughable. So, sorry, Photographer. You've seen better days for sure. Oh my goodness. We got the real old man of this tier list, Mad Eyes. Holy moly, where do I start with Mad Eyes? Alright, first of all, this guy is so sad. Just look at him. Look at him. Look at his sad face. He knows he doesn't belong in this game. Let's look at his early game winning strategy. His early game strategy is to go on the closest console, similar to Photographer, except Photographer at least freezes everyone in place. Mad Eyes, you need to hit someone 4 times with walls, and hopefully you're able to do that. And you know what else that's crazy about this? This is unlike any other hunter in this game, but you can directly counter his ability and make him not able to use it. This is unlike any other hunter in this game, we can just, as a survivor, just straight up touch the console, hack the console, waste all the walls, and it takes ages for the walls to come back, completely removing his control part in that section of the map. So his early game is right away really, really struggling because the survivors can just straight up counter you. So what are you left with? Okay, now you're just left with chasing the survivor, okay? So you're chasing the survivor,
the walls
and this dude
instantly.
can't even kill not even a second because he has nothing
down.
So it's kind of
pallet
ironic.
chomping,
pallet, just eating every single pallet in the way, and he still can't reach the survivor. This man is the veteran of pallet munching, and he still can't reach survivors just because of how bad his chase is. He has the fastest pallet munching in the game, even faster than Photographer, and it is actually sad that he cannot do anything though. His camping, I will give him. His camping isn't that bad, but his camping has gotten so many nerfs in the past. I mean, seriously, unless you get a very, very specific chair, this man is not going to do you any good. That's assuming the consoles nearby aren't completely drained. If they are
Next
drained,
up we
okay,
have Feaster.
That's a lot. That's
Feaster
great for
is
you.
another hunter
If they
that
aren't drained,
has
well, then what's going to happen is
outplay potential,
you're
but
going to
in
be
the
able to
grand
block
scheme of things,
survivors,
he's
but
just
half
too
the time the survivors
difficult
just
to
rescue
use
early against you, so
maybe
there's nothing you
the
can
way
do.
his ability
And the
works,
worst part
that is
about it
mostly
is that
what has
they
to do
rescued
with
early,
Feast
and they're not
in
punished
terms of
for
other
it
hunters,
because they
it
did
would
such
have
a
to
good
be
fight
more
against you
due
already
to
in the
their,
early game.
like Geisha,
And
for
it can be
example.
really, really
It's just
rough.
really, really buggy.
You may
Or
not
maybe
even get
Gamekeeper's
his full
hook
presence.
gets
His full
stopped by
presence
walls.
is what
The thing about
saves this
Feaster,
guy, but at that point,
and his tentacles is
are
that
we
Feaster
even going to
consistently
assume that you
use
got
tentacles.
full
Half the
presence
time,
in such a bad hunter?
just the
It's actually
Feaster
really,
tentacle,
really
just
sad.
something goes wrong.
But there's really no
let's
reason
say you just
to play
use a
Mad Eyes
tentacle,
in this
the
game.
survivor
It's
can circle
really,
around it
really
and they dodge the tentacle.
sad
Okay.
what he has become.
There's another
They
way
just
they can
nerfed
avoid it.
this
They can walk
Mad Eyes
farther
away
away
from the tentacle, and now the
to
tentacle's out of range.
oblivion.
The problem
With his recent
nerf from
tentacles, it's like
they
the
just
opposite
nerfed
of
everything
Sculptor,
about
but
him.
now
Tentacles
there's
are
no more
stationary,
consoles
which
in the
makes it
same
way
area
easier
so
for
far
the survivor
to surround
turns
the
one of them.
counter. You
On
can't
top of
just
that,
switch
when you
to another
summon
one
and
and
start
tentacle,
blocking
you
the
can't
same
use it for a second. It doesn't work that way in animation.
On top of that,
So that
survivors
gives
can
the
rescue
hack
time to
console
start circling it
twice
before
as
it can
fast.
do anything about
So
it.
you have
At
even
that point,
less
your
time
camping
protector
is a lot
consoles.
worse.
I
Now,
don't
I'm
even
not
know
gonna
why
say
this
it's
guy got
awful
awful
with the
on
camping,
top
but
of that,
his
Moonlit,
early game can definitely
everyone
be
knows
a
that thing on the
struggle to
Moonlit
use,
Bridge where
on
you
top of
used to be
that,
able
if
to
there's
block
any
the
tall
walls
walls
in the way he won't be able to use his
bridges
tentacle.
with walls,
But
and what would
those
end
walls
up
you can
happening
see
is
is
over
the
just
survivor
something
can't
like Rust
rescue.
Factory,
And that would
he's
be like
really,
the
really
one
gonna be
time
struggling
Mad
to
Eyes
see
is
over
amazing.
walls unless it's
But
over
guess
a
what?
window or a
They made it
pallet,
so
but really, it's a struggle using Feaster just because the moment you place a tentacle, the survivor's
Because
already transitioning to
Mad Eyes is
another
already
power
pretty
different
much
window,
known for
and then they can just
being
if
able to
if they get countered in every
they don't
single way
necessarily
possible,
need
just
to,
destroy the
but
console,
sometimes
even
or
if
maybe
you're
go
in range
underneath
of
the
getting a
building
basic
and then
hit
you
on them
can't do
after
anything
forcing
either
them to
rotate
and
away
yeah,
or not
good luck
rotate
dealing
away,
with
just
that.
transition
It turns
away.
out that going on the
They
Moonlit
oftentimes
Bridge
have an
is now
ability
accounted
ready
for
for
that
that
just because
even
even
prisoners
prisoners
stun
stun
can
can
be
be
a
a
decent
decent
job
job. By
against
all
Feaster and
means,
just
he
completely
deserves to
prevent
be in
him
the
from getting
ye
hit.
old man
That as a
tier
result forces
list
you to use another
section.
tentacle.
This is
And
gosh.
my
Eventually,
goodness,
there comes
why
a
did
point
they
with
nerf
Feaster
Mad
in
Eyes
the early
early
game
game
where
where
if
if
the
the
survivor
survivor
dodges
dodges
enough,
enough
in
tentacles,
fact,
you're
probably
left with
the worst
nothing.
hunter
You
in
don't
this game.
have
I do
items to
not
supply yourself
want to
the
ever
game,
play this guy. If you
in
ever play
that
him,
early game,
you're
at
probably
least,
losing
and
the
then
game.
you're
You're
gonna
really,
say
really
that right
struggling
now.
catching them. So on top of that, I'm sure All For One can tell us all about it. But Feaster has a lot of problems on top of that. I've seen All For One play Feaster. The dude's trying to pick a Feaster tentacle, and then the game just completely picks a different tentacle. Or maybe they're just trying to select the tentacle, and it just doesn't drop in the right place at the right time. And there's a lot of things that are super annoying with Feaster. In terms of his Cypher camp, I can't give him that much credibility either. He's really typically one of the slower hunters in this game as well, so makes him harder to use. His camping is pretty decent, but like I said, you can do the trick that I talked about earlier where you can, even if you take a Feaster hit, it is technically possible as Mercenary, even as like Gravedigger, to take a hit from that Feaster tentacle, rescue, and then use the boost from that hit to run away. And then at that point, the person off chair, and you will start running opposite directions. So now the Feaster has to choose which one does he want to hit. And whichever one he hits, the other person will get a bunch of distance. You typically want to hit the rescuer. But even then, with Feaster, you're running the risk that they're going to be able to rebound Kaichu. He's a hunter that's not very easy to contain a survivor. So if they get a chance to just make distance, there's a high chance that you're just going to get rebounded off of, especially if it's a survivor that knows what they're doing. They know the kiting route. They know how to deal with Feaster tentacles. I really can't give him that high of a rank. He's around Gamekeeper range. A similar story with Gamekeeper as with Feaster is that Feaster and Gamekeeper both struggle maintaining with the Cypher pressure and their abilities. Gamekeeper's hook can be actually really buggy, but the problem with Feaster is that his is the opposite. He has really good camping, but his early game pressure is super, super subpar to say the least because of how many ways there are to counter tentacles. We're not even onto the part where he did Soraya can just use durability and get away, or maybe tank a hit from the tentacle with like a perfume or a shovel. And at that point, that's a different story. At least he has decent camping, but even then, I think Feaster's camping is a little bit overrated. It's not as good as, like, let's say if I were to go against something like I don't know, like a violence. I'll be more scared of like a violence in Axeboy. Axeboy especially, there's so many souls sometimes, plus you may have that soul on you if you didn't have time to remove that tree. There's a lot of ways where just Feaster, in terms of even the camping part of the game, is not super fun to deal with just because this rescue can just circle the tentacle and can be really, really annoying. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next hunter, which is Dream Witch. Dream Witch is no doubt going to be our first S tier hunter. Now, why S tier hunter? A lot of people have been saying Dream Witch has become A tier after her nerf. In tournaments, yes. In tournaments, yes, there's no doubt that Dream Witch is A tier in tournaments, and I would much rather have someone pick Sculptor round 1 on my team. If I were to have a hunter on my team, would I rather have them pick Dream Witch or Sculptor? Sculptor, no doubt. Sculptor just has so much more ability to chase survivors down and kill them quickly. On top of that, Sculptor can just completely dominate on the chair camping section of the game, and it just gets more and more out of control afterwards. But Dream Witch, what about Dream Witch in rank? Now, rank, it's a different story because you're not going against teams of 4 necessarily, and that's really something important that has to do with all these hunters right here, guys, is that something like Ripper wouldn't be that good in just straight up tournaments because you have survivors that are going really, really good survivors. And as I mentioned earlier, Ripper is really only good if you're chasing something like a mechanic or like some survivor that has a hard time countering his Fog Blade. So maybe round 3, maybe round 4, maybe round 5 if we're memeing over here. But Ripper wouldn't be as useful in tournaments. Neither would be Wuching or Gisha's okay. I'm not going to knock down Gisha, but Wuching is just going to be really, really difficult just because the teammates are always pinging each other where the Wuching is going. Yeah, don't even try with Wuching. But with Dream Witch, in 4-man teams, it can already be a struggle communicating where the leeches are. And like you could have 4-man communication and you are still struggling to communicate where the leeches are, and you could still have someone die to a leech. Now, in terms of just chase early game, it is really, really annoying dying to multiple blinks on multiple patrollers. When you go against a really, really good Dream Witch, you really, really feel the pressure. If you're going against survivors that don't know what they're doing, they don't have super great game sense, then you are going to die hardcore to Dream Witch. Like, if you're not on 4-man communication like in rank, you're in a lot of trouble. It's honestly a surprise no one's using Dream Witch anymore, but Dream Witch, she is a difficult hunter to use. I'm not going to say that she's not difficult to use. Sometimes they say that she's brain dead, but to be honest here, she's a difficult hunter to use. But in terms of rank, it just becomes a lot easier because those survivors don't know where leeches are. Half the time when I'm playing survivor rank, what ends up happening is I run into another leech that belongs to someone else, and there's no way my teammate can possibly communicate that to me. So it becomes a real struggle, just not taking hits. And then I may end up taking that hit, and then I get blinked, and that's usually what happens. And that's really, really frustrating to deal with Dream Witch. And that's the biggest thing with rank. That's the whole reason she's good in rank. She's S tier in rank is because you can't communicate where those leeches are. If this was something like in a tournament, it would be a completely different story. But because this is rank mode, and it's because you're not going to have 4-person communication teams, assuming you're going against people who aren't trying to duo match together, and she's going to be very, very dominant, especially on like Arms Factory or Red Church. She can be a little bit map dependent, not going to lie. But in terms of the maps that you can play her on, you can really play her on almost any map in rank and just do amazing jobs. And if you're not going to win, you're still going to tie. This is a very, very, very strong tie hunter as well, if you're not confident in winning. So as long as you know what you're doing with Dream Witch, she is a very strong hunter. Even if the survivors know that you're near them, it oftentimes will still lead to their demise just because of the spam of patrollers, the barrage of blinks. It is ridiculous how good Dream Witch is as the game progresses, especially late game. Her comeback potential just skyrockets through the roof late game. If she has multiple leeches on the field and she's doing a good job keeping those leeches on the field before, making sure that those leeches aren't disappearing too quickly all at the same time, like maybe one disappears every 40 seconds, all right, that's fine. You can leech another survivor and the cycle continues. But really, As long as she has that kind of control late game, she can. Honestly, I've had several times where I just go from a win to a losing situation because of Dream Witch. Dream Witch is insane map control. Dream Witch is insane pressure. It is crazy how good it can be if you can manage to control all the survivors in one area. But yeah, needless to say, really, really strong hunter. So basically, it's not very consistent to get hits on the chairs with the fireballs. You shouldn't pray for it, but it's also not the worst thing to pray for. It could happen, but most likely than not, it won't happen. Is the point? In terms of his late game, as the game progresses, he gets the slowdown effect, and it can be really, really devastating to survivors trying to transition away. But the biggest thing with Axe Boy is that, similar to Ripper, Foggy Blade is always going to be there every 20 seconds. Next up, we have Axe Boy. Axe Boy is another really fun hunter to play with. He has insane mobility, so his early game chase can be really helpful against survivors trying to transition. Even if you don't have your restful road, sometimes that soul is enough to hit them. On top of that, they often have to move along with purple souls, and that purple souls is key to Axe Boy. Purple souls are what makes Axe Boy so good. That when the survivors try to transition, they're going to get hit by a fireball. If they don't transition, they're still going to get hit by a fireball, but they're just less likely to. So in the grand scheme of things, you're forcing the survivor to stay in the same spot. Now, in terms of his camping potential, it's okay. You're really praying that the survivor had a purple soul on them. And if you guys watch my rescue guide, you know I said to always break the tree before you go rescue, because then without it, the Axway has such a difficult time hitting on the chair, and it's going to be a real nightmare, especially since half the time the soul just gets soaked up by the chair, and that's similar to Ripper. He can struggle a little bit with the cipher pressure, but the nice thing about Exploit is you're never limited to just running one sort of tree. You can always run trump card, similar to Ripper. You can run trump card, and you have some solid mobility as long as you're not doing poorly with in terms of the early game. You can usually tie the game, if not even win the game. And really, it kind of depends on the map. But Exploit, he's a solid hunter. Like if I see an Exploit in rank, it's not a bad hunter pick at all. Honestly, it's similar to Ripper in the fact that he can be really, really good, and it just really forces survivors in a awkward position. Same thing with Ripper here. Honestly, you can make an argument with for A and B. If you're going against something like a perfumer, sometimes or like a gravekeeper, really, really dodge your soul and they go underground or they use their ability. A little bit weaker, not as much. But Gravekeeper, then again, he can just tank the soul. These are my it's not like Perfumer where she's stuck in animation. I use them because
honestly
they're
good because you
either
can
really,
tank the
really
soul and then wait
fast
at the
and
pallet
they're
and
fun to
see if
use
he
for that
swings or
regard, and they
walks
also
through.
have really, really effective abilities. So that even if you miss
For that
one
reason,
thing,
I'll
you
put
always
Axe
have
Boy
a little bit lower than Ripper.
in
They're
store.
both
So if you hit your
really
really
you're
decent
not going to be letting those survivors get very far.
Ripper's
And if
really
your
decent
axe, when you
rank.
hit them
Maybe
with a soul, you
maybe
also have
sometimes
that
I should
restful
do.
glow that they try to
Maybe
transmit
sometimes
away.
I should.
It could really that Ripper is
annoying
a
combo to
decent
deal
rank
with.
match, and I should actually start playing Ripper.
Of course, you can always run.
Who knows?
Trumpet
Maybe
as
in the
well,
future I'll
and you
start
can
doing
teleport
that.
late game, and that can be your map pressure if you want. Teleport, really do not underrate teleport with something like Ripper or Axe Boy, because those types of traits are really annoying. Because what ends up happening is with Ripper, you're probably going to take a fire blade right away. It forces you to use your abilities right away. Honestly, Axe Boy, this is hard to say. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not really sure for Axe Boy because honestly, his trees are really easy to destroy nowadays. The problem with Axe Boy is that in theory it works, but the problem is ever since they nerfed the trees, it's become a lot harder to get an early game as Kaiden as Axe Boy and just not get absolutely wrecked because they broke your tree and then you plant a tree and they leave the tree and they don't have a soul on them. That is how it works with Axe Boy. So in a way, it's sort of like with Mad Ice, how right as the game starts, you can just destroy the thing that makes Axe Boy strong. And so you know what? That's my one problem with Axe Boy. That's the one thing that's he's really struggling with. It's the fact that Axe Boy can get just straight up destroyed by survivors just destroying your trees, and then you make them transition away, and then the survivors just don't get another soul. Late game, he's a lot better. I mean, once he gets that full presence dash, he can jump across the map pretty quickly. But then he spent his ability to reach the survivor, and so then he doesn't really have anything to pick himself back up. Afterwards, he's just gonna have to wait on his cooldown to come back. He's not an awful. Next up, we have Lizard. Lizard is points for being
around like feaster tier. He can jump over pallets and walls and windows, but then
like
again,
I'd much rather
stopping the survivor from vaulting over
the
the
lizard
side
really
while
hard
you're
to deal
jumping.
with.
And so at that point, it kind of becomes a luck game. Like, do you jump over the pallet or do you just stay in the same place and hopefully you trick the survivor? It can be really hard to say with Lizard, and oftentimes with Lizard is not that good without his smash ability. So what ends up happening is this is the first hunter that we're going to talk about that really runs insolence. Smiley Face also runs insolence, but what ends up happening is you just end up killing them with the blink anyway. So in the end of the day, you can make an argument that he doesn't really need the insolence, but at the end of the day, they run insolence because that is the best thing you can do with Clown. It really, maybe the times have changed, but what do I know? Clown isn't that good in the first place. Evil Reptilian, though, on the other hand, has a lot more going for him. Not a lot, I would say, but in terms of chase early game, it really depends on the area. If you're going inside an area that like a building, you automatically have an unusable ability, which really sucks. On top of that, if you're facing like survivors that are able to react to your dash, sorry, not your dash, your jump, like Perfume, Gravekeeper, Mercenary, Elbow Pad, Football, Seer Owl even, it just does such a great job against it. In terms of camping, it's decent. It's okay. The smash power is okay. It's a little bit hard to use as Smashing Lizard. Not gonna lie, always having to expect what the Mercer's expecting, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. And that's the problem with the Evil Reptilian dash is that you don't always hit it off, and you can be a real struggle, especially if like you start getting Priestess portaled across the map after the rescue, or maybe just having to deal with other survivors that. Next up, we have Blood Queen. Now, Blood Queen is a really, really frustrating hunter to deal with. The existence of Blood Queen causes certain survivors to be unplayable. In fact, almost the whole roster of survivors is just unplayable because of Blood Queen. So what ends up happening is that if you ever face something like Prisoner or like just straight up Painter, even like Painters, like Survivors or Coordinator, these are not bad survivors to per se. But the problem is that when you play Blood Queen, it is almost it's like practically a guaranteed win with this hunter because what ends up happening is that you use one mirror and assuming you don't miss any mirrors, it's just a win fest. It's just a mirror fest. You just hit them mirror after mirror after mirror, and it, like at some point you throw in a blink there as well, and you're just gonna just attrition them down in the long run. So the thing about Blood Queen is she doesn't have any outplay potential. Um, but her mirror is just devastating. It's a free hit every 30 seconds. So what it means is you have to play survivors that counter Blood Queen. You have to play Perfumer. You have to play Gravekeeper. You had to play Mercenary. You know, good survivors that really, really do a good job against Blood Queen, like Priestess, Seers, stuff like that. And the biggest thing about Blood Queen is that if she's not facing those survivors, it's almost like she's S tier. It's that good. But here's the thing: when she's facing those really, really solid survivors that counter her hardcore, she's like B tier, maybe even C tier, just because of how easy it is to kite her at that point. I mean, she's going to use her blink at some point, but it doesn't change the fact that a Gravekeeper can keep elbow padding, shoveling away from a mirror, or a Mercer can keep elbow padding away from the mirror. Just one item per mirror. Definitely one of the hunters that teaches you to save one item as a survivor per hunter ability. One of the key hunters that teaches you that. But Blood Queen, when you're facing those types of survivors, is really, really rough. Like you're better off using a hunter that has better outplay potential than that. Because you're not going to be getting basic hits. A good survivor is not going to give you basic hits when you don't have your mirror. And that's the thing about Blood Queen, is that if you're playing something like Coordinator, you can't really complain because you picked a bad character against Blood Queen, so of course you're going to die. But if you pick something like Perfumer or Seer, you should be able to kite them. You should be able to 3-7 kite them, if not just straight up, just do enough of a kite for, at minimum, a tie. But usually you should win in such a situation. So she's S tier if she chases the right survivor, B tier if she's chasing the wrong survivors. She has decent control throughout the game, can switch areas rapidly, but the problem with that is if she switches, she has nothing afterwards, so you don't really want to switch as Blood Queen. You don't want to really waste mirrors to switch places and use it as like a teleport because your mirror takes a long time to come back, and on top of that, you won't have anything for the next 30 seconds. So you really end up saving them because it's better in the long run to save it. That's really your early game strategy. So Blood Queen definitely better than Ripper. Like I said, with Ripper, you can really make an argument with Ripper. It's either A or B tier, but Blood Queen, no doubt, A tier, very strong hunter, especially if you're not playing the right survivor characters. Next up, we have Bonbon. Bonbon, really, really annoying hunter to deal with as well, no doubt about it. It's so annoying that he can hit through walls. It's something like that Lizard really, really lacks because Lizard needs to commit to jumping over the wall. Bonbon can always stay on the same side of the wall, and he can keep hitting survivors through a wall. So just right away, his early game potential is really, really strong. Just especially if he can corner survivors in an area, then he can start stacking up those hits, combining with a blink. Maybe Peepers. Peepers, honestly, with Bonbon isn't actually a bad idea, just because it really, really synergizes with his ability to hit through those walls. Camping, no doubt about it. Camping is insanely, insanely strong. It is crazy good. Just how good his camping is. Just completely wipe out games, prevent survivors from ever even coming close to that tier. Or if it's like a mercenary that does rescue, sometimes you may end up hitting the mercenary 4 times, if not just straight up killing him off. But like I said, the biggest thing about survivors is that what ends up happening is they start splitting up their ciphers. They start doing ciphers separate across the map as the game progresses. We're talking like 3, 2 ciphers, 1 cipher remaining. What ends up happening is these survivors start splitting up and more so that you're never able to chase more than one survivor. And honestly, maybe I should rank down Ripper for that, because Ripper has absolutely a lawless reach with his Foggy Blade. But like I said, you can make an argument for both one. I might consider moving down Ripper in this tier list, but Vaughn 20, Guard 26 is definitely really, really strong kiting, really strong camping, really strong as the late game progresses. His presence makes a huge deal as the game progresses. He just starts spamming bombs once he gets presence, so it's really, really big deal for Bonbon. But Like I said, trying to pressure those ciphers, you kind of need to run teleport on him, or at least trump card at the very least, depending on the map. You'll run blink or trump card, or maybe you just run teleport and faster power break. It depends on the map. The other thing about Bonbon is that he's really versatile. You never have to run one build with this guy, and so you know what? I changed my mind. Guard 26 is going in A tier, but Ripper, I'm sorry, Ripper, you're good. But you're good, and like so, he is A tier sometimes. Like I really want to make it clear that, dude, if there was like an A minus or a B plus tier, he is in that range, but he just needs a little bit something more, like maybe add a fog zone to survivors that are standing too long in place, and then reduce their decode. I think that would make him actually a super solid hunter, but right now he is still solid. It's just the biggest thing right now is that if you go against the wrong survivors in the wrong area, you could be in a lot of trouble. And like the best you can do is tie. So you know what? Just because according to my conditions, according to my tiers, I did say that B tier is for hunters that can still tie, but they just struggle. They just struggle to get that win sometimes. And so I think Ripper honestly fits that bill. Now that I think about it, but Blood Queen, no doubt, she's obviously going to get that tie. Guard 26 obviously going to get that tie. Almost potentially getting a win in some cases. If a survivor ever makes a mistake, boom, win for you, win for your team. Uh, Violinist is another weird one. He's very similar to Ripper. These two hunters, Ripper and Violinist, very similar, very intertwined with their abilities, their system, their core mechanics are very similar. You use your ability, you wait until your next ability. You get a little bit bonus, like in Ripper's case, it's invisibility and speed. In Violinist's case, it's demon notes and slightly slowing down the survivor. But they nerfed violence really, really hard, and the nerf was absurd. The nerf was undeserved. So what ends up happening is the survivors are able to get rid of those notes way, way quicker. So if you end up hitting them, even when you try to pressure the ciphers with your violin note across the map when you're camping someone, it's not that good. It becomes really, really weak as a result, and just able to just poof disappear, and they can start decoding the cipher really, really quickly again. He does get his ability much quicker than Ripper, like 6 seconds. So if these two server counters are really, really easy to compare, very similar to each other, except Violinist I feel like there's a lot more ways you can go wrong with Violinist than Ripper. Ripper is like once you get close, you're pretty much guaranteed that five-blade hit. There's nothing the survivor can do except use their ability. But with Violinist, you can outplay Violinist. Violinist is not a hunter where like once he like throws his note out, you're dead. Not like Ripper. Violinist, really, there's a lot of outplay potential against Violinist. I'm not going to say he's a bad hunter, but definitely struggles on the cipher pressure part of the map. And what ends up happening is he usually just ends up tying the game because eventually he'll get the survivors to use some abilities, but as a result, it's costing him time on chasing that survivor. And so his camping is okay. It's decent. I'm not going to say it's bad, but it's also not the greatest. And as the game progresses, like he gets that increased full presence, but as violence got more and more popular, people started more and more understanding how to dodge his full presence. And at this point, you shouldn't even expect to get that hit against survivors that know what they're doing. And so it just becomes really, really hard to use. His full presence may as well not even exist sometimes. So for that reason, I'm going to put him in B tier. Similar problem with Axeboy, similar problem with Ripper, similar problem with Soul Weaver. It's not that their chase is bad. In fact, I would say their chase is way above average. It's just they have a really hard time dealing with those ciphers, and they just end up getting cipher rushed to oblivion. Ripper and Spider, you can run teleport with. Violinist, you can also kind of run teleport with, but like I said, he kind of needs to trade that trait a little bit more, just because his abilities is a little bit easier to avoid. Next up, we have Anne. Anne is a really difficult hunter to place because she's decent, but at the same time, if you're in the wrong area, what ends up happening is that you're gonna get kited because there are certain situations where I'm playing against Anne and she just I'm like I could play something like Coordinator. Like I'm not even playing like a super good counter against Anne. Like Coordinator is not that good against Anne. Like you have one gun and that's it, and then she could just use her cats again. She's very similar to Blood Queen in that regard, but Anne is a lot more limited than Blood Queen. Blood Queen can go travel across the map. Blood Queen is not stopped by walls, and Anne can just keep. Anne is the opposite. Anne is stopped by those walls and doesn't have as much mobility with her ability, and so she really struggles to keep up the same way Blood Queen does. What ends up happening is usually she gets a quick kill, but then she's pretty slow. She's trying to catch the next survivor, and by that point, she's usually getting all the ciphers popped because she just wasn't. She's not catching. She's not moving quick enough. She's not very efficient. Sometimes, and this happens quite a bit when I'm playing against Anne. Not even sometimes, but a lot of the times, what ends up happening is I'm able to use walls to my advantage, and then the walls are blocking the Anne, and it's really, really obnoxious for the Anne because by then my cats disappear, or she's just forced to make them go away. Especially if you're kiting her on a place with heights, it can be a lot more annoying. It's honestly the same story as with these other hunters that beat here. Wu Cheng is the one exception. He's an oddball. He has really, really, really strong map control, but weak chase. He relies on that bell. That's the biggest thing with Wu Cheng. Once he gets a bell, I'm not gonna lie, Wu Cheng's decent, but at the same time, bell is countered just by simply dropping a pallet, vaulting a window, and like literally the bell doesn't do anything. All you have to do is dodge a calibration. That's not that hard to do. So I'm gonna give Anne the same tier just because she's similar to Blood Queen, but it's just easier to dodge the ability. That's literally all it is. It's just easier to avoid the ability. So if you want to tie Hunter, this is probably your go-to. Probably the best out of all the hunters in this B tier category. But definitely also you could just pick Blood Queen. And that way if a survivor makes a mistake at any point, you are just in such a great position as Blood Queen. Sculptor. I don't think I have to say a lot for Sculptor. Honestly, easy S tier, especially in rank match. In tournaments, it's also an easy S tier. It's just extremely strong early game, can completely negate areas from being used. The thing about the Sculptor's statues is that not only are they one-time uses, but you can reuse them. They bounce back and forth, so it just completely negates an area from being used much longer than if you were to say, like, let's say you use Violinist No, right? You use the No, and then once you use the No, if a survivor dodged it, well then too bad. The No doesn't do anything after that besides slow them down. Guard 26 bombs, you can set them up, but the moment they blow up, you're done for. You're going to need to have a new set of bombs after that. A Sculptor, though, her ability constantly reuses itself, and you can later combine that with full presence. You can hit a survivor with regular presence statue and then combine it with a full presence and get 2 hits that way. It is insane combo. Needless to say, her camping is very strong. Not a lot to say there. You all know why she's so strong, and exactly, Sculptor no doubt deserves to be an S tier. Moving along, we have Percy. Dude, I thought he was going to be A or S tier when he first came out, but this guy is a huge disappointment. Percy has probably one of the strongest mobility abilities in this game. But at the end of the day, he struggles because of his, they don't combine well with dealing with walls. It's really, really good when survivors are transitioning, but when they're tie-kiting you, it can be a real nuisance. A lot of the times you're not even getting countered by the pallets, you're getting countered by windows. And that is a similar story with Wu Cheng, actually. You're getting countered by windows, especially when you're playing Black Form and you're playing Percy, you're getting countered by windows hard because you need to confine space them. You vault them so slowly, and they're reusable. Even if you confine space them, if a survivor can use another POW for the next 20 seconds and then come back to that window, it just wastes a lot of time. And it's really, really effective for survivors to just use that. I've had times where I've looped Percy's who weren't using confined space on a shed window. It was Leo's memory. I was looping him non-stop on a shed window. There was nothing he could do. Like, he could try dashing him. Good job. You got to dash off. You're a little bit closer, but because the dash has that animation, you can't control how far you want to dash. You have to make sure you hit a wall or something like that, and it's just too much of a nuisance at that point. On top of that, when he gets his 50 energy, it's great and all that he can't get stunned, but at that point the survivors start spamming their abilities and there's not a lot you can do. Similar to let's do a side-by-side comparison of Percy
Blood Queen
versus Broken
These hunters don't have anything in terms of like outplay potential when it comes to like when the cipher is about to be popped. Like, he can't just use a no recovery ability. He's always gonna have to trigger recovery. That's always gonna lead to survivors being able to get away. The thing about Undead is at least when he knocks them down, he he could potentially just kill them on the spot. But the whole concept with Undead is completely wrong. You're supposed to like knock down the survivors and leave them alone. The thing is, if you weren't able to pick yourself up against Undead, like if you had to have someone else pick you up, it would be okay.
But then what ends up happening is that the survivors start doing deciphers. Like
Breaking Wheel,
this is
finally
how you beat undead.
can start rolling
Someone goes
over
down,
survivors.
Maybe they
hitting
do it
them
back
with
spikes,
so they need to use windows.
And all that happens
can't
is
do
that
anything.
everyone
Like,
still
maybe
stays
pray
the
that
game,
you're
like nothing
giving
ever
everyone
happens
roll them
because
around
they
in a
all
circle.
know that that person is going
Yeah,
to self-revive.
that usually doesn't happen for
just
very
easily
long.
be able to
Usually
pick themselves
Breaking
up
Wheels are
when the
able to
person
quickly
finally
use
it's
their
basically
spike
like
ability
rescuing yourself
at
off the
1,000
chair. It
presence,
is
or
so
just straight up
sad.
just turn
Let's
around
not even
and
do
hit you that way.
The fact that you can
by,
actually start escaping
changing
your
your
path
path
when you knock people
Literally,
out.
this
It
hunter
is so stupid that
is
you can
everything
just
that
leave
Percy
the game
is, but
when
way
he knocks
better.
you down and
I
you're supposed
don't
to
understand
die.
what the
And
point
the
of Percy is.
300%
Like,
increase
why
death
does
timer
Percy
doesn't do
exist
anything. You
even?
just
Like,
escape
it's
and
Breaking
just
Wheel is
crawl
just a
out.
better version
Same
of
thing with
Percy.
dungeon.
Everything
Breaking
he needs to be
Wheel
able to close.
does
Percy does
He
way
needs to
worse.
be able to
Like,
block
Percy has
off
everything
gates for a
Breaking Wheel
temporary
has,
amount of time.
but
Like,
just
same
way
thing
worse.
with Dead by
Like, the
Daylight,
fact
for
that
those that
Breaking Wheel
don't
can
know.
just
And
press
Dead
a
by
button and
Daylight
just
kills the
Hunter can
survivor.
actually
I mean,
close
that
the dungeon.
automatically puts
Or they
Percy
can make
in a
walls
choke position
in the way
with
in
the fact
the
that
gates. And I want
Breaking
Percy
Wheel
to
can
have
travel
that
across
ability.
the map
Because
infinitely.
as he stands
Right
right
now,
now,
literally every
use an
time he
ability and
knocks
he's
down
stuck
someone
in
with a
place,
gate, he's a
he's
slow
they just
hunter.
leave. They just
Everything
leave. They
about
just
him
kite
sucks.
to the gate and then
And on top of
boom,
that,
you just lose.
because
Seer
of it.
Owls,
You just get a tie. You know, you were
Shovel
doing
is
so good
ignored
the
by
whole
the
game.
Breaking Wheel.
And then
Seer
you just
Owls
tie because
boom,
doesn't protect you at all.
Gate,
You
or maybe
just
someone
snap
sends
and
a
you're dead.
priestess portal across the map.
So in
There's
terms
a lot of
of
ways to
comeback
go wrong
potential, obviously
Percy.
was the fastest hunter in this game playing Mario Kart
A
8 at
failed
this point.
experiment. That is exactly
Just
what Percy
boom,
is. He's a
zooming
failed
across the map,
experiment.
stop them at their
both
gates,
as
at the
a
tracks.
lore character.
Breaking was also
in
one of the
action.
only hunters in this game where Wanted Order is actually really decent for because of his insane maps.
Percy
Just
has the
goes
ability
across the
to
map
travel
immediately.
across the map.
As soon as she gets
So it's
that
Breaking
hunter
Wheel,
gets Wanted
except
Order
it's infinite
on, like, a
and way
mercenary
faster.
coordinator, they can just see where they are.
Percy has the ability to not get stunned in pallets.
On the
and,
contrary, though,
and
what's gonna
other
end up
ways
happening
of
is
getting
survivor
stunned,
will
such as
identify
enchanter
that,
stuns or
and the
coordinator
survivor will make sure
flare
to get out of the way.
Same with Breaking
They're
Wheel.
gonna make sure to
Except she has it permanently as
have
long
a
as
different- have a
Breaking
different
Wheel is
rest period,
inside
though.
of the wheel.
But
It's
other
just
than that,
infinite.
You know, Breaking Wheel is an amazing hunter. Once
Undead
you
is
chair
supposed to
someone
counter
once, there's
pallets
no
by
way
not being able to
survivors
get
can
stunned by
escape
them.
at that point.
Breaking Wheel
They're
just
gonna
rolls
keep
them
getting
over.
snapped and
Just
snapped and snapped,
rolls
and you're
over the
you're
pallet.
just gonna die. And that's the way with Breaking
has
Wheel.
to
It's very
maintain
unfortunate,
that.
very tragic when you're a survivor, but that's the way it is with Breaking Wheel. Honestly, the thing that's making Breaking Wheel so good is her traps. His traps. His traps are what makes this hunter so insanely strong. You know, if it weren't for those traps, this Breaking Wheel probably would have a hard time just getting 1,000 presents quickly in this game. But because of the fact that the traps snare you in place, like you can't even drop the pallet at least to protect yourself, is just so insanely strong. I don't understand why the traps are able to do something when you don't have any spikes in it. If I were to nerf Breaking Wheel, I would do something about the trap. They've tried nerfing the full presence, which was helpful. They've tried nerfing the snap, which was okay. It was helpful somewhat because it reduced the range from 32 meters to like 16, which is much smaller. But at the end of the day, this hunter will always be able to press a button, even if they make it 5 meters. That is still insanely strong just because as soon as you're in range, you just press a button, you kill them. It's literally like Ripper, basically, at that point. Once you're in range, you just kill them. But the thing about Ripper is that Ripper actually has to get close to you. Like, we're talking like 4 meters of distance. Breaking Wheel, just boom, you're dead. You're dead. 14 meters of distance behind any walls, behind anything. And that's the thing that makes Breaking Wheel so strong once she gets that presence. So how do you stop that? By nerfing the trap. You would nerf the trap, this is how I would nerf the trap, basically. Make it so that no spikes doesn't do anything to the survivor. Make it so like maybe you get like a negative 10%, negative 20% speed decrease for the survivor, but really that trap shouldn't be able to do anything because it's already good without the spikes. And instead of having to freeze survivors in place when you snare them once they have spikes in them, why not make it so that the survivor can actually do something? Because when you have a survivor that just gets frozen in place like that, they can't do anything. They can't use their abilities. They can't use pallets. They can't use any windows. And that's the thing about the difference between freezing them in place and just slowing them down, is that when you're slowing them down, they can still counter you. They can still use their abilities. They can still use their pallets and windows sometimes if they're close enough. So in my opinion, they should change the ability to freeze survivors in place with the trap to just slowing them down significantly. So basically, we're talking like 80, 60% decrease, as long as they're able to at least still do, use a pallet or use an ability or something like that. But just right now, you just throw a trap and you're dead. And so I would definitely nerf Breaking Wheel like that. Other than that, really strong hunter, not much to say there. Naiad. Naiad is honestly one of the hunters that's being slept on in this game. I don't see enough people using Naiad because Naiad is such a really, really strong hunter. She has really, really strong early game pressure in the fact that it forces survivors to transition. And even if they transition, they usually get some sort of water progress on them. So like 30%, 60%. You don't allow the survivor to transition at all, because if they try to do that, you're going to return your harpoon, you're going to get it back to you, and you're going to swing at the survivor. But the thing about that is, if they're playing like a certain survivor, like Perfumer or Gravekeeper, then that gets really, really annoying, because then as soon as you retrieve your harpoon, like this is literally what they'll do. You're going to use your harpoon and you're going to try to start circling them. But then the Gravekeeper or Perfumer, or like the Mercenary or Forward, is just going to run away from the area. They're not going to use any abilities, right? So then you as a Naiad have no choice. You're going to try to circle them, but you're just going to keep running away in a straight line. So what they're going to try to do is you're going to try to return your harpoon. And what happens? The survivors use their ability. That's what happens. And so she has really, really strong pressure on the ciphers sometimes. Not the greatest, but it's pretty considerable how much pressure she can put on those ciphers. A Naiad also able to control large portions of the map. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the ability that Naiad has when she makes water on the first floor and second floor. Any water that she has on the second floor, as long as it connects to the first floor, will then transfer down to the first floor as well. So even if there's no like circle area around you, if you go underneath it, it counts as being in it. Very strange. I don't know why. That's the way it works with basement as well. So if there was a Naiad that were to make a huge circle around basement, but as long as she touches the basement floor and then made a huge circle around basement on the second floor, it counts as being all in the water. And so it's weird, but it works. And Naiad is just a really, really strong hunter. And the fact that even if you try to get distance from her, it doesn't work because she has that dash. And even if she doesn't have the dash, she's a fast hunter anyway. And definitely don't mess with Naiad. I'm definitely going to give her an A tier. Really strong hunter. I don't see enough people using Naiad. It's a little bit of Penguin. It's like Penguin, not as strong in the camping department, but really, really strong in terms of the late game build up. I mean, it's crazy, 50%. So you dash the rescuer twice, or maybe you just dash them once and return your harpoon and you damage them. The full presence with this hunter, similar to Sculptor, similar to Bonbon, similar to Breaking Wheel. These hunters right here, like on not really Bloody Queen or Dream Witch, but really these four hunters right here that we're seeing in S tier and A tier are super, super strong once they get full presence. So definitely props to them. And really strong hunters. I do encourage you guys to use Naiad. Really decent hunter, and definitely don't sleep on her. Wax Artist is extremely sad, though, on the other hand. Wax Artist is everything this... It's like a really cool concept. It's like trying to put a 3D... It's like trying to put a third-person shooter inside of Identity 5 and then just completely failing because you forgot that every other hunter in this game can already shoot abilities through walls. It just... The problem with Wax Artist is that it's really, really cool how you're able to shoot wax at people and you're able to freeze them. It's like Breaking Wheel, but a lot worse, basically. And he gets some wax when he stuns them. But the whole problem with him is that anytime a survivor starts using any palace nearby with tall walls, we're talking Arms Factory, Hospital, Red Church, Lakeside, Moonland even. There are several places, like Moonland is probably his best map because there's the least amount of tall walls, but all the other maps he's just really, really struggling on. And he's trying to use that wax gun, but half the time it can't even hit the survivors because they're behind a wall. If you try to cover ciphers, that's great and all, but it only lasts 10 seconds, so you have to keep redoing it every 10 seconds. It's not like Naiad where it lasts 20 seconds. I don't understand why Naiad lasts 20 seconds and he only lasts 10 seconds. That's the other thing about Naiad. Naiad is able to trap her targets in, so they can't leave and they have to take that water damage or they have to take a basic hit. Wax Artist certainly does not do that. Wax Artist is just always on the move, trying to go after the survivor, and the survivor just kind of has free reign because as long as the survivor is staying behind some sort of wall, you can't do anything as Wax Artist. I'm not going to say that you can't do anything at all, because there are definitely times in between. Like at some point, the survivor does have to transition, and if you're running faster power breaking, that's your chance to get some wax. But dude, unlike Naiad, Wax Artist's wax just disappears like crazy. The thing with Naiad is that it's really nice with Naiad because not only did they buff how fast she gets water every second from 5% to 6% every second, it's also purposefully designed so that the water doesn't disappear immediately, so that even if you're struggling to get that full 100%, it's not like it's going to disappear instantly. You have like 10 seconds to hit the survivor at least once again before it starts draining progress. Even once it starts draining progress, it's super slow. And so it gives you plenty of time to hit them one more time with the water and keep that progress high and just consistently build it up. Wax Artist just loses it all insanely quickly. So if you're ever in a position where like they pop the ciphers, dude, GG with this guy. You're gonna need a teleport, and even if you teleport, his pressure is really sad because like once you teleport, what good is it with teleporting if you don't have a good way of killing the survivor? That's really what we're gonna go over with the last Hunter Nightmare. Same thing with Wuching. Wuching is a lot better though, because Wuching can surprise them and get that free hit that way, and then blink them, or maybe Insolence will finish off the rest. But with Wax Artist or any other hunter using teleport, unless your ability can go through walls, it's not going to combine very well with teleport because then the survivor is just going to walk over to any good paladin in this game and just drop it, and then boom, you're done. You're done. You have nothing. At least Bomb Bonner could have dropped the bomb through the wall. Blood Queen would have mirrored through the pallet. Breaking Wheel wouldn't even need teleport. You just roll there. Sculptor would just get there with no problem with the full presence statues. Dream Witch blinks over. Naiad uses that water to surround all these other hunters like Ripper, Sawyer, and you know what? This kind of proves that Ripper's kind of a B tier hunter because if once the survivor is able to drop the power and gets a little bit of distance, dude, you can't use your Foggy Blade anymore. It's not like with Knight or like with Sculptor where you can just go around and like it consumes the palette. It just consumes the whole area basically. Same thing with the bombs of Guard 26, and that's really the problem with these all three of these all these hunters below A tier is that when it comes to their chase, they're just significantly struggling. Even Axe Blade to a certain point. Axe Blade is kind of risky if you try using it when they're behind a powder window. Because if they dodge it, then your speed boost is useless. Because you have to vault the pallet or break the pallet. Break the pallet or vault the window first. And Nightmare. Oh, jeez, where do I even begin with this guy? You guys remember how I said teleporting doesn't really do you much good if your main ability sucks? Like you're gonna teleport and then what's it gonna do if your main ability can't get you any hits? That is exactly what's going on with Nightmare here. So he starts off with just his dash. He has to stare at survivors for 6 seconds. You know how he said Waxers gets countered by walls? Nightmare can't even use his ability until they get out of that wall. And guess what happens? If they go behind a wall again, you gradually lose any progress you got from stalking your survivor. And sometimes it's a loop. You try to stalk them, they go behind a wall. You lose progress. You try to stalk them, they go behind a wall. You lose progress. And it's the same thing. It's a cycle with Nightmare, and it's really really awful. When you finally get your dash ability, oh my lord, you are still in the same position. Instead, you are left with a temporary dash ability, and the dash you always have to use it. You have no choice. You always have to use it. You always jump into a wall, and it's really annoying. If a survivor's hiding behind a pallet, literally, it's so annoying because then if you're on the other side of the pallet, you have to angle yourself in a specific way so you jump through it, and hopefully the survivor just doesn't just drop it before that. You get to do that. So you kind of need to run faster power breaking because your whole ability revolves around the basic hit. Like I mentioned earlier, hunters without any form of doing damage other than basic hits tend to struggle when it comes to hitting over pallets. Like they're going to need some way to hit through walls at that point, or just go over walls. And Nightmare certainly doesn't have either of those. It is a huge struggle getting him anywhere. Dude, his Crow would be good if it actually combined with his ability, but it's god awful. It is so god awful. You send a Crow and it doesn't do anything. You send it, it just reveals their location. Good, good. You have a miniature peeper following the survivor now. What good is it going to do? It doesn't decrease their movement speed, doesn't decrease their interaction speed. Even if it did, it would be awful. If you're going to buff the Crow, they need to make it so that the Crow combines